Hey you guys, this is Hunter, and I'm so grateful that you're joining me on today's episode of the Inspired Studies podcast, where my hope for listeners is that they not only gain new insight on Holy Spirit-inspired topics, but are also inspired to go and engage in their own personal study of these topics so that they may learn more about God in a personal and intimate way. Today, we dive into segment 2, where I invite a guest speaker to join me as we discuss how the topic from last week's episode impacts our own Christian walk through personal testimony. Didn't hear last week's episode? Don't worry. You can check it out and the resources provided from last week's episode in the links below. In addition, be sure to check out the study questions that are attached to help you jumpstart your own study. With all that said, I hope you enjoy, and without further ado, let's begin on the second segment of today's topic.
Welcome, and ladies and gentlemen, to the Inspired Studies podcast. I'm your host, Hunter, and I'm super excited to be having my friend James Thompson joining me today. I just say, howdy. So today's episode is on who is God. And so just really understanding that personal relationship that we have with God and knowing who he is, because without knowing who God is, we can't have that personal relationship. So in that, I'm going to kind of start a little bit on the personal testimony side of it. For me, I grew up in the church, raised in the church my entire life. But it wasn't till about 2 or 3 years ago, I went to a Christian concert, and as I was sitting there, they had a little donation opportunity where you could give to a specific cause. And I was really struggling. I was in my seat sitting there going, God, is this something that I'm supposed to do? And in that I really struggled because as I was trying to wrestle with that of, okay, God, should I not? God spoke to me and stated that, the reason why you're struggling to give is because you don't know me. And it's hard for you to trust in something that you don't know. And that really came as a sucker punch to the gut for me because, again, like I said, I had been raised in the church. I had thought I knew God in and out. I knew God all the way. And it turns out that God kind of revealed to me that I didn't really know him. I knew about him, but I didn't really know him. And so thus that moment projected my new kind of Christian walk where I was like, okay, God, I really want to know who you are. Not kind of as a Pharisee where I know about you and I know all these decrees and things about you, like, God, you're a loving God, or God, you're a trusting God, but truly knowing it within my heart, experiencing that. Has there ever been an opportunity or ever been a time where you faced something similar to that?
Pretty similar. I mean, as the same, I grew up going to church, knowing scripture, knowing the Bible, but a lot of it was as real as it could have been, but there was no, if you're a real God, then I want to experience you. I want to know you. Mm-hmm. That happened for me probably about 2-3 years ago. Mm-hmm. Around about the start of COVID. Through a bunch of different circumstances, ended up in places where I wanted to know and experience if you are real, show me. I want to figure this out, truth or no truth, show me who you are. Mm-hmm. He did show himself to me.
Oh man, well, what are some ways that God has shown himself to you in that way?
Well, most of them have been more, I don't want to say indescribable personal experiences, but it's in moments of prayer. It honestly started with wanting truth. Mm-hmm. And physical evidence. I love science and how the world works and studying stars. And the more I got into just not the philosophical yes or no questions, but facts, evidence, history. Is there archaeological evidence to support it? How does our world work? Does it point to a creator, or does it point to random chance and design? And that is honestly where it started, is asking every hard question that I could think of and doing research, looking at other people's research to figure out what the answer was. Mm-hmm. And then from there, once I was in a place where I was fully submitted to my creator, that's when I was able to start hearing his voice and actually being open to, hey, I am real. I love you. I care for you. Can I show you?
Mm.
But I had to get to the point of, okay, if you are real, which I believe you are, show me.
Mm. No, I love that. And I think you bring up the great point of sometimes, or of it is okay to ask those hard questions. I think that sometimes we often as Christians like to shy away from those hard questions, especially the ones that we don't necessarily know the answers to. But kind of like you, I've had that experience where, I want to ask those hard questions. I want to learn those hard truths, because even though it is difficult, it's in that time that God, I feel like, reveals himself even more. I think back to one of the quotes, just of where we try to put God into a box and we try to solve everything about him. I mean, and we have to think we know a limitless God who there is no limit to him. And so we can learn about him. We can learn more about him, but there may be times where we don't know everything and we have to trust him in that. But that doesn't also neglect the fact that we shouldn't try to learn about him. I know, like, one of the things that really stirred me into wanting to learn about God more is I had heard all these worship songs like, you're a good, good father, and God, you're faithful, you're loving, you're trustworthy. And it was like, God, how are you those things? Like, and for me, I had to personally experience it. Like, I had to personally come to know, okay, God, like, you're trustworthy, but how are you trustworthy in my life? Like, how can I see you trustworthy either in my life or even in the people around me? How can I see that? How do I know that? And so for me, it took different experiences. And I feel like God has been walking me through these past 2-3 years of coming to know him intimately on that personal level. And it's almost like at certain parts, God's like, here's my character trait. Here it is in this season. Again, and I think I've talked with you about this before, like one of the most tangible ways for me is just the place that I live at as well as the job that I work at. To kind of give some background to it. When I first I was living with a roommate before, and we were living in the Land O'Lakes area. And our lease, I had known that our lease was going to end in October. And I'm that type of person that likes to prepare and plan in advance. So I was looking back all the way in March and April, and I was looking for a new place to live. And God was like, it's not time to look. I was like, okay. So I stopped looking, and, March turned to April into May, then May into June, July, August, we're going into September, and then finally tail end of September going into October. And I'm like, God, like, our lease ends in literally like 30 days. When am I supposed to look? And finally God was like, okay, it's time to look. And so I start looking on the market, and I find this place. I'm like, oh my gosh, this seems like the place that I should be at. And it had everything that I would need. It was within range of my work. It was within my price range, which was so great. And I was like, okay, God, like, this looks like the one. And I call the person and I show my interest, and they go, hey, I'm so sorry. We're on our way right now to go sign the papers for, the person that just signed on this. And I was like, oh. And so I was like really bummed out. I was like, God, like, I thought this was the place. Like, what in the world? And so about 3 days goes by, and then I get another call. And when I get the call, I was already in class, so I couldn't take it, but I get the voicemail and I answer it. And I see that they had responded back of, hey, something fell through with the previous resume that we were supposed to have. Are you still interested? And I was like, oh my gosh, yes. And went through all the steps, got it. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, God, like, it didn't look like I was going to get this place, but you continued to tell me just to trust you in it. And I did. And look what happened. And then, a couple months later, the job situation, I had felt, God was calling me from teaching high school to go teach middle school. And he had kind of called me that to the year earlier. And when I kept looking for jobs, it never went through. And so I was like, okay, God. And so I decided, all right, I'm going to start looking now. And there was one place in particular that really stuck out to me. And I was like, okay, God, I guess. And I'd been praying about it. Okay, this is the place I'm supposed to go. And when I went and applied for it, it went off the job site. Like, it was no longer there. And I was like, what the heck? I didn't even get an opportunity to interview or anything. And so I was like, God, I thought this was the thing. And then I was like, okay, God, you know what? If this is kind of what you did with the house, like, you got a sense of humor. And God, and again, just God continually just kind of, or had just been telling me, like, trust in him, that he's going to take care of it. So I was like, all right, I trust in you. And so like 3 weeks later, the job opens back up. I apply for it. I get the interview. And within that same week of the interview, I got the job. And so it was in those 2 instances alone that I learned, like, okay, God, you are trustworthy. Like, I can trust you. I don't have to worry. I don't have to fear. I don't have to be anxious. You know, I can trust you and what you say and what you do. Like, it may not seem like things are going to play out the way that I think they should, but I can trust that if you've called me to it, if you said that this is what it's going to be, that I can trust that you're going to get me there. Have you had a similar experience with like a character trait of God, or just something about God that you're like, okay, I firmly know and believe that this is who you are, God?
Maybe not in the same token as that, but a lot of it has been learning how he's extremely patient with me. Because I'll know I'm supposed to be leaning into one side of trusting him, or a way of thinking, and I'm impatient and want to just kind of check the box and say, I've done that. I've got control of that, or time for the next thing. It's like, no, wait, don't rush me. Wait, I'm not done yet. And a lot of those moments have been slow and frustrating, because there'll be a season where I'm really wanting to just move on to the next thing, whether that's in like the work life, like wanting to live in my own place, wanting to live somewhere else, wanting to live close to home, whatever it looks like. And every time I've tried to rush and do things in my own time, it's felt stressful. I've made mistakes. It's been in my own strength, but when you kind of sit back, say, all right, Lord, like, I'm going to pursue you first. I'm going to decide what I want to do based on not what I desire most in this moment, but what I know to be true based on your word and how you're teaching me to live. And it definitely brings forth a lot more joy in taking it that way.
I love that. I say one of the things that, I had done within the study was I was looking at some of the different names of God, because within the names of God, we get kind of characteristics of who he is. I mean, kind of like you had said about, being patient, how he is a patient God with us. And again, he does not rush things. Sometimes we think oftentimes God's taking a little bit too much time sometimes, right? And there are some different names I know that, we've, that people have found of, like Adonai, the great, my Lord, or my great Lord. You probably have heard some more of the popular ones, like Jehovah Jireh, Jehovah Nissi, Jehovah Rapha, and having these different names of God. And I know one that's always really stuck out to me has been El Roy, and that's just the God who sees me. I know that there have been times where I've felt that, I might be invisible, and God has shown himself even in those moments that, like, I see you. Like, even when you feel invisible, even when you don't feel seen, I see you. I see the things that you do. And it really, for me, God really made himself apparent and helped me to see that. Actually, I was serving at a women's conference, and they had Lisa Harper there. I think, it was either right at the women's conference or right after it. She had come and spoke, and she was talking about the story of where Jesus is at one of the dinners with one of the religious leaders. And as he's there, a a woman comes and washes her feet, and washes Jesus's feet with her hair, and she's crying and all these things. And the religious leader's like, oh my gosh, do you know who this woman is, and everything like that. And Jesus, and I love how Lisa Harper broke it down. She brings up about how Jesus is looking at the woman while speaking to the religious leader, and he's like, don't you see you've got it wrong? Like, this is, like, don't you know who she is and what she's come to do? Like, she has come to spend time with me and be in my presence. And it just reminds us, like, even in that correction, like, he is still affectionately looking at her, like, showing her that even regardless of your sin, regardless of who other people may call you to, what they may say about you, I see you for who you are. And that just, like, pierced my heart when I heard that. Because it's like, and I see that now with how even regardless of our past, regardless of who we are, God sees us for who we are. Like, we have to think, like, God was our creator. He knows every single thing and every single facet about us. In Scripture it talked about how he knows every hair on our head. And it's like, God is just, he's the one that sees us for who we really are, and he loves us and accepts us regardless of that. And so for me, that name has always stuck out to me of El Roy, the God who sees me, that no matter the circumstances in our lives, it doesn't escape the fatherly awareness and his care for us. Has there ever been like a name of God that has really stuck with you in particular?
I don't know necessarily a name of God, but more of an attribute. He's described often as a shepherd, a good shepherd, and how that applies to us, to me. Because I don't like to think of myself as like a kind of a dumb sheep, just not knowing what to do, doing the wrong thing. But that's me through and through. And he calls us to be sheep first and foremost, to be a lamb, to sit at his feet, to listen, to take from him, to follow his guidance, often blindly. But then there's this other side where he says, okay, like, you are my sheep, you know my voice, you listen to me, I have taught you well. Like, now I would love to partner with you for you to be a shepherd in part to others as they're figuring out how to listen to me. And Revelation talks about Jesus, the chief shepherd, but there are still others under him that he, for some reason, has decided to join with and, in a sense, relinquish some control over how things are playing out. He's still sovereign. He still has his will that's going to play out, but he's given us autonomy in his creation that he loves. How does that work as a father that loves his children, letting them, once fully trained, be like their master? Paul talks about this, how every student, once he's fully trained, will be just like the master. So God as this, you're talking about this God that sees us, that knows us, will train us in such a way that we're able to share how we've learned with others, pull each other along, and just acknowledge this crazy God that we're able to, in a small part, fathom and grow under.
And kind of with that, I would ask, like, what do you think is the importance or the significance of knowing that God is the shepherd, especially the chief shepherd, and that maybe knowing our identity of being, the sheep, and that, what do you think is the significance behind that and knowing that?
For me, it's been acknowledging I need to relinquish control. I have, for a large portion of my life, wanted to do things my own way. I was that sheep that decided, this posture is not the greatest. I want to find something that's better and more suited to my needs because I know myself best. Who else knows me other than me, right? You hear that all the time. Find your own way, find your happiness, whatever's good for you, do it. That's not the way life is supposed to be lived. That's not what Scripture teaches. It's not how Jesus taught us to live. And so for me, that's been just the knowledge of who God is, I then know who I am in him. And with that, nothing else matters. I can let go. It's not easy. Oftentimes it's very challenging to actively set aside or let go things that are not just clearly harmful or destructive, but the parts that we consider good and beneficial, he asks us to lay aside for a time, sometimes never to pick up as a sacrifice to him. Like, why only offer the things that are broken, but the things that are holy and good and unblemished? And for me, seeing how there's just so much more to my life, so much more understanding of purpose, of eternal significance, and even little mundane things. It really doesn't matter what I do because he cares for me. He wants to spend time with me. And at the end of the day, there's nothing better than that. That's the full circle moment for me, as I continually realize that with different words, with different experiences of he has no care for anything that I could do for him other than me spending time with him.
I think that's a big thing. I mean, I know like myself, sometimes I've gotten so caught up in the works-based of, I have to, earn the approval of God. I have to, do all these things to get up to God. And when we realize that God, like you said, God isn't that way. He doesn't want works from us, like I and correct me if I'm wrong, but in the sense, one of the verses, it states that, what do I desire more than a broken and repentant heart? I don't desire your sacrifices and your festivals. Like, I just want a broken, repentant heart. And sometimes it comes down to that of, okay, God, like, you don't want the things that I can do. You just want me. You want to spend time with me. And I think that kind of full circle, bringing it back, like, that's how we get to know about God more. I mean, you think about it in terms of a regular relationship. You don't spend one day out of the week with a person and know them intimately like you would want to. Rather, you spend constant time. I mean, you talk with them, you call them, you text them, in some cases, you fly down to see them, And so it's like, in that it's like you go and desire to spend time with that person. And I think that's the same thing with, our relationship with God, that we're not so caught up in trying to do things for God, but just trying to spend time with God and know who he is intimately. And kind of to wrap it up, like, this is where I've kind of seen it within my own relationship with God is, I did some studies before where I did, little bits here and there, but I also found that part of my studies came from, even the inspiration for studies came from conversations where I was either talking with God or talking to someone about God. And then I was, okay, God, I want to figure this out more. I want to know you more. And so I would go into the word and, okay, what does this verse say about you? What does this Hebrew word or this Hebrew translation or Greek translation say about you? And just getting to learn about God more. And so in that, kind of my final words is that when it comes to your relationship with God and coming to know God, there's a difference between knowing about him, where, again, we can hear about it on our worship songs. We can hear about it in church. But the difference is actually going and spending time with God and getting to know him intimately and personally. Going and, whether it be your own personal study of, hey, I'm going to go through this specific book of the Bible and look to see where is God in this. Or if it's, hey, God, I'm going to look at this specific topic or theme and I'm going to learn more about you through that. I feel like personally, at least for me, that's how I've come to learn about God more. And just getting to see his character and see who he is in different situations of, again, people's life in the Bible, but also how God is and what he's like within my own life and my own story. Anything with you, any final words regarding that?
I think the more I've tried to get to know God, I slip into what you were saying earlier about like this works righteousness, where you want to, okay, God is God. How do I do my duty to him to learn about him? And we would just miss the point when we do that completely. The Son of Man did not come to be served, but to serve. And that's still applicable today, like how to wrap my mind around the fact that God doesn't just want me to know him. He wants to be known by me and to, in some senses, actually be the one serving and helping me. He doesn't just desire me to be his friend and subservient creature. You know, it's this strange dichotomy of this creator loving his creation enough to die for them, to rise to what's the opposite of rising? To lower himself down to our level and say, like, I'm here to serve, to help you. And it's so easy to just say that in my head, but to actually live like that, of like, my creator wants to come alongside me, under me, lift me up, like do life with me until I can actually spend eternity with him, is mind-boggling. Where there's a portion of how we learn that through study, like Paul talks about this a lot, like the renewal of the mind, learning Christ. He's so thankful to the Corinthians that they learned Christ in such a way. But then he also goes on the other side and just says, I pray that you may be filled with the love and peace of Christ that surpasses all knowledge. Like, you can only learn so much. There is a side of God that has to be experienced, where you can understand how you're not only under his control and under his guidance, but he wants to come under you too. Just beyond understanding.
Yeah, no, that is, I mean, it's crazy. I mean, and I know I'm going to be exploring that a little bit in a future episode of just kind of the free will that God gives us in that of, hey, this is, what I want for your life. But also, like you said, kind of taking a step back and lowering himself and like, I'm going to serve you in that anyways too. So
unimaginably powerful, crazily creative being that decided to partner with us.
It's a crazy thought.
Yeah.
So, well, I want to thank you again for joining me today, Mr. James, on Inspired Studies Podcast. And thank you guys all for listening. I hope you guys are blessed with this. And again, I'll be sharing some resources as well that you guys can also go and do your own study. I'll share some of the notes as well as some questions that you can follow along with and do your own personal study with. But with that, we end. So thank you very much and have a great one. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for joining us today on today's episode of the Inspired Studies Podcast. Again, I hope that you not only gained new insight, but also became inspired to study this topic further for yourself and how it affects your own Christian walk. Not sure where to begin? Don't worry. With this podcast, I've attached the link to my study notes, as well as the sources and a download link where you can download the study questions that pair with the study notes. That way, you have a resource to jumpstart your own study, whether you decide to do so individually or in a small group. As always, I hope you guys have enjoyed. If you did, please leave a like, a comment, and share with others. And while this is a non-profit podcast, if you'd like to give, I'm currently raising funds for a missions trip that I'll be going on for 11 months called the World Race. If you feel led to give, I'll have a link attached below. Any support is greatly appreciated. Thank you again for listening, and I hope you all have a great day. Stay blessed and stay inspired. Bye-bye.